The Wall Street Journal, Thursday, July 1st, 2021. Cosby released from prison after court overturns case. Holy shit, you're kidding me. So, not even going to go into the story. Clearly, this is nuts, although it's not nuts in the sense of the reason why is because the government screwed up. So, one would hope that this would happen, that if the government put somebody in prison the wrong way, they should be released. Although this man clearly should be in jail. What's news? Robinhood Financial agreed to pay nearly $70 million to resolve regulatory allegations that it misled customers, approved ineligible traders for risky strategies, and didn't supervise technology that failed and locked millions out of trading. Seriously? Stocks closed out the first half with double-digit percentage gains. S&P 500 is up 14% this year, ending June at a record, while the Dow climbed 13%. Amazon.com filed a request with the FTC seeking the recusal of new chairman Lina Khan from antitrust investigations of the company. DD share ended their first day of trading up 1% at 14.14, giving the company a market capitalization of roughly $68 billion. Ford said that the computer chip shortage will force it to cut output across more than a half dozen U.S. factories in July, and one would wonder how in the world the United States was not prepared for this. TPG, one of the last of the original private equity giants to remain a closely held partnership, is evaluating a public listing. Exxon CEO apologized and disavowed statements made by two of the company's lobbyists after Greenpeace released a video of them dismissing the firm's public positions on climate change. Hertz emerged from bankruptcy protection under the new owners and a new board. The original files of the source code for the World Wide Web were sold as an NFT for $5.4 million. You're shitting me. Some people just have too much money. So what else we got? Maybe we should get out of the United States. What do we got? NIH's diversity obsession subverts science. No. Canadians follow U.S. lead in ripping down statues? By Lawrence W. Krauss. Brettlebone, Prince Edward Island. I moved back to Canada in June after living in the United States for 45 years. After planning the move for more than a year, I was thrilled to cross the Confederation Bridge and into the tiny province of Prince Edward Island. Everyone from border guards to health officials was lovely, reinforcing my memory of this region as one of the friendliest parts of the country. Then I read the newspaper. I was immediately confronted by a scandal that had occupied much of the country's attention for weeks. The discovery of the remains of 215 children buried in the grounds of the Kamloops Indian Residential School in British Columbia. And just last week, another 751 unmarked graves were discovered in the Marieville Indian Residential School at Saskatchewan. Such schools, the last of which closed in 1996, were federally mandated in 1883 and were based on the then dominant view that Indigenous children, for their own good, needed to be removed from their homes, educated, and converted to Christianity to assimilate into Western culture. The Canadian government wasn't alone in this view. It borrowed heavily from the United States government reports recommending similar practices. They were also common in Australia, where Aboriginal children were forcefully removed from their homes. The schools, administered by churches, would have been bad enough had they competently served their purpose, but they turned out to be torturous, as children reportedly faced physical, sexual, and psychological abuse. The undocumented remains of the 215 children at Kamloops School, discovered in May using ground penetration radar, triggered a justified national outcry about how the country ought to engage with its harsh treatment of Indigenous people. But the residential school scandal is also provoking unreasonable responses from progressive activists, included here in Prince Edward Island, one of only two provinces that never housed residential schools. Neighboring New Brunswick was the other. Following public protest over the schools, the City Council of Charlottetown, the province's capital and largest city, voted unanimously on May 31st to remove permanently the statue of Canada's first Prime Minister, Sir John A. Macdonald, from a downtown intersection. It was torn down the next day. 3 weeks later, a statue of Macdonald was removed from Kingston, Ontario, and a working group has recommended a similar removal in Toronto. 3 city councillors in Ottawa have also called on Canada's federal government to rename Sir John A. Macdonald Parkway. The Charlottetown Council's vote mirrors similar moves in the United States, which have targeted not only Confederate generals and politicians, but figures like Washington, Lincoln, and Grant. In Macdonald's case, protesters targeted him because his government commissioned the study of the eventually led to the establishment of residential schools. Posthumous punishments like these solve nothing except for satisfying some primal need for payback. They trivialize deep issues by seeking scapegoats and distract from the more important task of seriously considering history and policy. Every major national leader in the 19th century instituted policies that would be unacceptable even to consider today. Yet, whatever Macdonald's shortcomings, he was the first prime minister of the country that the protesters apparently care enough about to want to improve. Canada's Confederation as a new nation was set in motion by 1864 conference in Charlottetown. The statue there, presumably commemorative of Macdonald's role in history. Not surprisingly, there have been protests online calling for an end to the celebrations of Canada Day, the July 1 celebration of the Confederation's anniversary in 1867. Perhaps it hasn't occurred to these self-styled anti-colonialists the irony of boycotting independence celebration. If we remove every Macdonald statue in Canada and every holiday is loosely associated with him, we might as well remove markers for every significant historical figure so that we can limit such commemorations only to those who acted, governed, and spoke in a manner that is consistent with today's progressive sensibilities, which themselves may not live up to tomorrow. Exposing the cruelty of residential schools is important and should serve as a starting point for a thoughtful discussion about the role of church and state in the lives of Indigenous people and all Canadians. But to erase Macdonald's positive contribution to the country's founding is to obliterate history, not to understand it better. Mr. Krauss, a physicist, is president of Origins Project Foundation. His most recent book is The Physics of Climate Change. Here, this article makes an important point that average people of today are tearing down amazing people of the past. If you look at most people in history, under the lens of today, most people will fail. Even as recent as late 60s, early 70s, you look at people boycotting Vietnam or women's lib, you look at their fundamental doctrines, and they still, even those who were at the sharp end of the spear, even their work seemed, to today's standards, quite sexist or whatever. It seems ironic that mediocre people are feeling the need to take down people that were outstanding in history for what they were today. Imagine if we decided that every achievement in the past had no value based on the achievement of today. Seems very strange. Very good opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal today.